Hey everyone. So this week's topic is privacy. The TED Talk that you're going to listen to is really about online privacy, but it's really also about like just all privacy in general. So I'm here to read you a couple excerpts from 1984. Unfortunately, we can't read the whole book, so I'm just reading you like little tidbits here and there, and I'm going to try to fill you in with as much context as you'll need to understand what I'm talking about. And as I'm reading these excerpts, I just want you to be thinking about, what if this was your life? What if this was how you lived, and what if this is how our world was? So just as a little bit of background, Winston Smith is the main character, and he lives in a dystopian society. So it's what was intended to be a utopian society or perfect society, but obviously it fell short. It's actually a dystopia. It's basically like living in a hell. At least it's one that we would probably all imagine as hell. And in that, you are constantly being watched. So the first little excerpt or quote that I was going to read is just "Big Brother is watching you." So I'm sure that a lot of you have heard of that before, have heard that saying, heard that phrase, and that actually is coined in 1984 by George Orwell. So it's pretty cool. You get to learn the background for this. But essentially, you're always being watched, and therefore you do not have any privacy in this world. So I'm just going to read you a couple excerpts from the beginning and throughout the book. And again, just be thinking about, what if this was your life? How would you react? How would you feel about it? Any of that. So Winston is in his house right now, and this is page 2, so it's really early on. It's just explaining what his typical life is like. He's in his apartment. So it says, "The voice came from an oblong metal plaque like a dulled mirror, which formed part of the surface of the right-hand wall. Winston turned a switch, and the voice sank somewhat, though the words were still distinguishable. The instrument, the telescreen it was called, could be dimmed, but there was no way of shutting it off completely. The telescreen received and transmitted simultaneously. Any sound that Winston made above the level of a very low whisper would be picked up by it. Moreover, so long as he remained within the field of vision which the metal plaque commanded, he could be seen as well as heard. There was, of course, no way of knowing whether you were being watched at any given moment. How often or on what system the thought police plugged in on any individual wire was guesswork. It was even conceivable that they watched everybody all the time. But at any rate, they could plug into your wire whenever they wanted to. You had to did live, from habit that became instinct, in the assumption that every sound that you made was overheard, and, except in darkness, every movement was scrutinized." Winston kept his back turned to the telescreen. It was safer, though. As he well knew, even a back could be revealing. So basically, this is just to give you some context that this guy lives constantly being watched. There is this device in his house and in every single person's house. No matter where you go, you're being watched outside. But in everyone's houses, there's these things called telescreens. It's essentially like a Facebook portal. I don't know if any of you have those, but it's a screen, like a video screen, that can both send and receive video and audio. So someone can basically look into his house at any given time. Anyone from the thought police, which we will get to later. And therefore, everything that he does in his house is watched. And then obviously, as soon as he leaves, this is more than like red light cameras that we have or things like that. It's like everything you do and everywhere you go, you are being watched. There is no such thing as privacy in this world. So think about what that would do to you. How would you feel about that? And just a little bit more context, just to make this all make sense. A really important feature of Winston's home is say his apartment is like this little, it's just one room, and I actually drew a little picture, so I'll show you. But so basically, this is Winston's apartment, and the telescreen is right here, so it's on this wall, so that he can see, so that anyone could see everything from the telescreen from that side view. And then there's like a bookcase on one side, but on the other side, it's empty. And that's important because typically the other side would be filled with a bookcase too. In most people's houses, it's also filled with a bookcase. But in his, he has this little alcove that's set behind the telescreen, which means that he can sit back there, and it's this like little ounce of privacy. It's this private little place that he can't be seen because the camera, it sticks out a little bit from the telescreen, so it can see 180 degrees. It can see like directly to its side all the way around to the other side, but it can't see behind it. So that's where he hides. And that's a really important part of him going through and like starting the entire process of him kind of trying to revolt against this system that he lives in, is because he realizes that he has this like little taste of privacy. So let me go on to the next excerpt. So, and just to that end, it says, it was partly the unusual geography of the room that I just talked about that had suggested to him the thing that he was now about to do, which is that he is about to start writing a journal, which is illegal at the time. So, or rather, it's not necessarily illegal, but it's punishable by death. They don't really have laws because they don't need to have laws, because everything, you just disappear if you do something wrong. And so, he starts writing a journal. And the instant that he does that, he recognizes that he is pretty much doomed. He knows from page 6 that of this book, that and he starts recognizing, the audience starts recognizing that, like, is there any way out for him? Probably not. He has already doomed himself because of the thought police, which we will get to again in just a moment. So, think about how being watched makes you act in a different way. Really think about that. I know a lot of people are often inclined to be like, no, like I'm myself all the time, no matter what. I always act the same. I'm not different with different people. All of this. And I know the inclination is to think that, but in reality, really think about the way that you act and how it might be different when you're with your friends or with your family versus when you're alone. All of those different ways of acting are different levels of what you feel as privacy. So be thinking about that. It says, he says on page 17, it says, to disassemble your feelings, to control your face, to do what everyone else was doing was an instinctive reaction. And so he is taught really well, because this has been his whole life, that he needs to act in a certain way. He needs to have his face in a certain way, because these thought police could come and they could find him otherwise. So he is constantly aware of how he's acting, and he's constantly aware that he could be being watched and that it could be used against him later on in his life. So think about the one place, like, is there anywhere in the entire world that you have true privacy? Like, what is true privacy? What do you even think privacy is? And where is the one place in the world? Is there any place in the world that you think that you have true privacy? If we were in class right now, I would be like waiting to be able to call on some of you and have me, or have you give me some thoughts on this. But I will tell you that the one place that I think that there can be true privacy is in your mind. So you can think whatever you want in your mind, and no one knows. No one can read your mind. No one can read your thoughts. Even if they know you really, really well, they can't truly know what's going on in your head. No one can. And that's really the one place that you can truly have complete, absolute, positive, and sure privacy. But one of the concepts that's really scary, I think, in this book is this idea of the thought police. So you don't learn right away like what that really means and what that is. It's not super important right now, but I just want you to think about the fact that Winston Smith lives under the impression and with the idea that the thought police are constantly able to read people's thoughts. They're able to look at you and know what you're actually thinking. And going back to what I had just talked about, it says on page 19 now, it says the thought police would get him just the same. It made no difference whether he wrote down with Big Brother or whether he refrained from writing it at all. It didn't make any difference. Whether he went on with the diary or whether he did not go on with it made no difference. The thought police would get him just the same. He had committed, would still have committed, even if he had never set pen to paper, the essential crime that contained all other crimes in itself. Thought crime, they called it. Thought crime was not a thing that could be concealed forever. You might dodge successfully for a while, even for years, but sooner or later, they were bound to get you. And let me just go on. Sorry, I just have to switch around a bunch. So, and then on page 28 it says, thought crime does not entail death. Thought crime is death. Now that he had recognized himself as a dead man, it became important to stay alive as long as possible. So basically, again, he recognizes really, really early on that like he's doomed. There's no way out for him. He knows that he's already committed this thought crime. It doesn't matter if he commits the crime of writing a journal or any other crimes that he commits, because he's already doomed, because he has had thoughts against Big Brother and against this country and society that he lives in. So he already feels like completely lack of privacy, and or he feels like he knows that there's no privacy, and he knows that that's going to be the end of him, because he had these private thoughts. So now his goal for the rest of the book is to stay alive as long as possible so that he can do something about it, essentially. Okay, so go on. So this next excerpt is pretty short. It's just really about the concept that, so he has a dream about his mother, and in the dream, after he wakes up from the dream, because it doesn't really matter what the dream is, once he wakes up from the dream, he thinks about the fact that there's all these feelings that are lost in the world that he lives in, because people aren't allowed to feel this like full spectrum of emotions because they're not able to, since they're not allowed to. And so therefore there's this whole like sect of humanity that is cut off and not accessible to people. So he says, tragedy he perceived, excuse me, I'll start over. He said, tragedy he perceived belonged to the ancient time, to a time when there was still privacy, love, and friendship, and when the members of a family stood by one another without needing to know the reason. So I just want you to think about, if you don't have any privacy in your life, what else do you lose? Like, try to think about, maybe even write some things down. If you have no privacy in your life, like, what are other aspects of your life that you see as lost, essentially? So think about that. And then let me go to my next one. So this is just illustrating, this is further along in the book, it's on page 82 now, but this is just illustrating the way he was expected to be and the way that everyone in this world acts. So it says, it was assumed that when he was not working, eating, or sleeping, he would be taking part in some kind of communal recreations. To do anything that suggested a taste for solitude, even to go for a walk by yourself, was always slightly dangerous. There was a word for it in newspeak. Own life, it was called, meaning individualism and eccentricity. But this evening, as he came out of the ministry, he wanted to go for a walk. And just think about if that was a dangerous thing for you. When you guys get stressed or tired or fed up with your families or friends or whatever, or you just feel like being alone, think about what you do. Like, do you go to your room? Do you go for a walk in the woods? Do you go for a drive? Think about all those things and how sweet it is to be able to do them when you want, and to have the freedom to do that, especially as sophomores. You guys are all, hopefully, I know some of you have been delayed in getting your licenses, but all of you are being given more and more freedom right now, than you've probably ever had. And as you gain it, think about how good it is to have and how nice it is. So be thinking about those, be thinking about the things that you do and like why you like privacy, and just like the peace that it can bring you, and the ways that you get it. So like, what do you do when you want some privacy? Where do you go for it? All right, so next. So this next piece, this is much later in the book now. This is page 117. Essentially, he has met this other person who he believes also wants to do away with the life that they have, and she doesn't like the lack of privacy that they have. And so they agree to meet up in secret, in private, and that's really important. So he keeps having this dream about this place called the Golden Country, and it's basically like out in this field. There's nice trees around. It's just really peaceful and pretty. It's outdoors. It's kind of like where I'm sitting, but it'd be really sunny and nice and warm. And he meets this girl in a place that is really, really similar to what he's dreamed about. So he says there were no telescreens, of course, but there was always the danger of concealed microphones by which your voice might be picked up and recognized. Besides, it's not easy to make a journey by yourself without attracting attention. For distances of less than 100 kilometers, it was not necessary to get your passport endorsed, but sometimes there were patrols hanging about the railway stations who examined the papers of any party member that they found and asked awkward questions. So imagine, again, if you were trying to go into Boston for the day with your friends, and you were getting stopped by police at every train stop saying, why are you going in there? What are you doing? Why are you with people? What are you really going for? If you're just constantly being questioned, obviously you're going to want to stay in your own area. You're not going to want to go anywhere else because it's scary. So again, just be thinking about what this would do to you, and to the way that you live your life, and the way that you think about life and experience it, everything. And so just later on, it's a couple pages after that, basically he's with this girl in this little field in this private place, and she says, "Never mind, dear, there's no hurry. We've got the whole afternoon. Isn't this a splendid hideout? I found it when I got lost once on a community hike. If anyone was coming, you could hear them 100 meters away." And so they have this like newfound privacy. They have this spot that they can go to, and they're not actually able to really return to it, but it doesn't matter because they were able to go to it, and it's this really nice place. It gives them this sense of privacy. So imagine what it would feel like if you didn't have privacy your whole life, if you had none, and then all of a sudden you found a place that has privacy, where you had privacy. Think about what that would do to you. And lastly, but not least, one more quote that I found that I thought was worthwhile. So later on, Winston he goes into this other area where it's these people who are less patrolled, because they're kind of like stupid, low-born people, and so the patrols basically just don't worry about them because they're not party members, so they don't patrol them as much. They don't all have telescreens in their houses, and Winston starts going into these prole cities and trying to find some privacy there and just like find some answers there. He feels like the answer lies in the proles. He feels like he's gonna be able to find some like revolution or underground brotherhood that's hiding in the proles, and he thinks the key to being able to revolt or fight back against this society that he lives in the proles. So it says Mr. Charrington, who is the owner of this apartment that he goes into, he had bought this little trinket from him one time, and now he's going back because he knows that Mr. Charrington has an apartment upstairs and it has no telescreen in it. So it says Mr. Charrington had made no difficulty of letting the room or renting the room to him. He was obviously glad of the few dollars that it would bring him, nor did he seem shocked or become offensively knowing when it was made clear that Winston wanted the room for the purpose of a love affair. Instead, he looked into the middle distance and spoke in generalities with so delicate an air as to give the impression that he had become partly invisible. Privacy, he said, was a very valuable thing. Everyone wanted a place where they could be alone occasionally, and when they had such a place, it was only common courtesy in anyone else who knew of it to keep his knowledge to himself. So basically, it's saying that Mr. Charrington knew that Winston wanted this privacy of this room, and he understood that, and anyone who understands the feeling of privacy and the enjoyment of it also understands that everyone else wants it too. And so if he's able to give that to Winston, it makes him happy. And so he's happy to give Winston this like privacy for himself too. And so, yeah, just think about all of these excerpts, be thinking about what this life would be like for you and what that would feel like to live in. And imagine if you got privacy after you hadn't had it. If any of you ever shared a room with someone before, like siblings or anything, and then you get your own room, what that felt like. And just be thinking about like why it's so important. And yeah, and then just read over the questions that I post on there, and I look forward to talking to you all about these things on Thursday and Friday. All right, see you later. Bye-bye.